Hi, Director Kuhn. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
How are you?
All's good. Having all this fun setting up all these meetings.
Yeah. The novelty has worn off by now.
I'm waiting for the thumbs up from you, Angie, that we're streaming.
Colin, you're really dark with that light behind you. If you want, everyone.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's no blind on the window
So
yet.
You need a lamp facing you.
Streaming now.
We're streaming now, everyone. So could I ask everyone to mute their mics, please? Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our special meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee of April the 29th. I'd like to welcome the directors and staff that are on this WebEx call and the people at home that are watching this being live streamed. I would just like to begin with recognizing that we're not gathered, we're gathered virtually, and there are people in the territories of the Coast Salish and the Nachalnith speaking peoples of the coast. And with that, I'd like to just ensure that everybody's cameras are well positioned. They are. Thank you for adjusting your camera, Alternate Director Haim. We are learning as we go, and we're modifying our process as we learn. And as I'd like to mention to people watching at home, we are going to modify and learn from our last meeting, and we will be going with a show of hands on votes. And if we have a very close vote, we will go to our virtual hand up, hand down process of recording votes in the negative if there are close votes. I'd like to ask everyone that we try and be patient with each other. Some of us might have bandwidth and technology issues, and we will work at a methodical, measured pace. Speak clearly into the mic, and when you're not speaking, could you turn your mic to mute? And I'd like to remind members of the public that if you have a question for question period, keep in mind we have a policy on question period that they truly must be questions of items that were on our agenda today. And those can be submitted to Angie Legault at Legislative Services, and it's all lowercase, one word, Legislative Services at cvrd.bc.ca. And just prior to going to the agenda for approval of the agenda, I would like to note that Ms. Hughes sent out an email with some supplemental information for items R2, which was an email from the Pineos. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And an additional item, a letter for R5 from Redden Goodmans. So with that, you have the agenda before you. Could we have approval of today's agenda? Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Kuhn. Are there any additions, changes, amendments? Director Nicholson. Oh, Director Nicholson was getting her hand up early. All in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That's a real lag time. I should check with Director Nicholson. You were voting in favor of that agenda? Thank you. Next item is the public input period. And with the public input, I will turn to Ms. Legault to read items that have been submitted to her. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's several items today. The first is from Bernhard Yearlink, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, regarding item R4, which is the Erie Resort rezoning. Dear Chair, I have nothing against the proposed changes to zoning and OCP. However, I note in this instance where building had occurred without appropriate permits, the CVRD is bending over backwards to make the Erie Resort area bylaw compliant by adjusting the zoning and OCP. Mr. Chair, I note that the next three sentences refer to an active bylaw enforcement investigation, which shouldn't be addressed in this forum. But to summarize the comment, the writer expresses an opinion regarding differential treatment of two matters. And moving back to the submission, Mr. Yearlink continues as follows. It seems that business and not simple homeowners get the cooperation of the CVRD. Another instance of this I note is on Goldstream Heights, where landfilling wood waste and hydrovac wastewater dumping is occurring on a site deemed by the Ministry of Environment to be contaminated. When a neighbor pointed out that prior to this landfilling, she had a well with potable water and now her well is contaminated by lead at over 5 times the drinking water quality guidelines, and that such dumping should cease, the CVRD sided with the landfiller whose property incidentally is in foreclosure and allowed to continue dumping. The only concern I have with the proposed Erie Resort proposal is whether there is enough water available. I note that the well tested by BC Aquifer was tested in November of 2019, with only one other well being monitored. Such tests should be conducted in the dry summer months and more than one well should be monitored. Note that when the well was originally drilled in July 2016, the static water level was 37 meters, while the static water level in November 2019 was 133 meters. I also note that even though the well was tested in November, the estimated yield was only 24% of estimate when the well was originally drilled. The wells of the resort draw from southern part of Aquifer 207. This part of the aquifer is known to have low water storativity. And this is from Mr. Yearlink from Mill Bay. The second item is from Cliff Evans. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This is also in regard to item R4. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake and noticed an application to amend the South Cowichan official community plan and zoning bylaw to bring the Villa area's operations into compliance with CVRD regulations and to allow further expansion of the resort. I'm very concerned about the firefighting approval in attachment O. The Malahat Fire Chief writes in conditions for approval. She had concerns over more water storage tanks that would be required. She also wanted to know which fire chief approved the fire suppression and asked for a copy, which she did not receive. She requested funding for more training for her firefighters. Malahat Fire Department does not have a ladder fire truck to fight a 6-story blaze. It would have to rely on mutual aid from Mill Bay or Shawnigan Lake. The Malahat Fire Department should have a ladder truck and a facility to store it in. We should give our firefighters the equipment and training to handle any task assigned to them. Perhaps this could be an amenity. The water licenses must be obtained under the Water Act, and a multitude of regulations have to be adhered to meet the approval of the Water Act. This is from Cliff Evans. And there is a third item from Susan Kaufman respecting Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Susan Kaufman from Satlam. On today's agenda, there are 2 lengthy applications, one with 26 attachments and the other with 19 attachments. This seems to entail an awful burden on the part of the area directors to digest and comment on within a very short time period. Lots for the public to take in as well. Regarding item R3, development permit 1804 for 5301 Chester Road, have the 5 conditional recommendations of the APC been resolved? The overall design is not welcoming and appears to lack green space, employee amenities. Questions remain pertaining to landscape lighting and inadequate EV charging station relevant to the size of the development. It is noted that there are several outstanding compliance issues related to earlier phases of the development, and is there an expectation to complete? Mr. Chair, R4, rezoning 18A02, Villa Erie is a very complex application that contains an OCP amendment and rezoning application. Very little time has been given to the directors and the public to review this file and provide input. We've heard from senior staff on previous applications that items pertaining to covenants and amenities are best addressed prior to first and second reading. The staff recommendation to approve option 1 as adopted today, it will severely restrict the directors and the public to have input. Questions remain as to how the CVRD will conduct public hearings within the limitations of the public health emergency crisis. With a request to hear an update on the procedures for public hearings. Mr. Chair, please consider receiving R4 and deferring first and second reading until such time as the directors and public have had time to digest this file and provide input and procedures for public hearings are in place. And that is from Susan Kaufman. The last item that was received, you referenced from Mr. Pineo, who is the applicant for item R2. And as that was circulated to directors this morning, that item can be addressed alongside that agenda item. And that concludes the public input.
Thank you, Ms. Legault. We have no delegations, and the next item would be correspondence, and I will read out the item. I'm having some lag time as well. The recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that a grant aid electoral area B Shawnigan Lake in the amount of $400 be provided to the Shawnigan Residents Association to support digital infrastructure for the community directory in the South Cowichan area. Turn to Director Acton. Would you like to move that item? Moved
Yes,
by Director.
please. Could I also make a comment?
You can make a comment after a seconder. So seconded by Director Kuhn. Director Acton, go ahead.
I would also encourage area A and C to perhaps give a small grant aid to the Residents Association as well. The infrastructure to build this type of directory is not cheap. So if they feel inclined, that would be great as well, because it is for the whole South Cowichan business community. And yeah, we want to support our local businesses, especially at this time.
Thank you, Director Acton. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call. Oh, I've got Director Wilson and Director Salmon. Did you put your hand up as well?
Yeah.
So Director Wilson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we just give $100,000 to the SRA for something else? And you want some more now from us for another directory?
$100,000?
Was there not some money given to the SRA recently?
There was money.
Director Acton, hang on for just a second. This is a very specific item for a specific project, and I just suggest that I'll let Director Acton answer, but this grant aid is for a specific thing, and I don't think we should be confusing one funded item for another. But Director Acton, go ahead.
Thank you. Perhaps you're thinking about water quality testing done for the research team. I'm not sure what you're referring to, because we haven't given them any money for anything, and nothing to that extent. So,
Director Salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Atkin, if you could send me some info, I will consider donating.
sure.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this grant aid? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I'm assuming that was unopposed. The motion carries. Next item, information. We have none. So we will now go to number 6, which is R1. And I will turn to Mr. Limshu, and confirming everyone's mics are off. Mr. Limshu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to change over to the presentation. There we go. Before I get started, I thought what I'd do is just quickly talk about Alr applications, because item R1 and R2 relate to applications pertaining to the Alr. Generally speaking, when we receive applications for proposal within the Alr, there are generally 4 recommendations that the local government can consider. Recommendation number 1 would be to forward the application as proposed. Number 2 would be to forward the application with comments from the local government. Recommendation number 3 would be to forward the application with no comment or recommendation from local government. And number 4 would be just simply to deny the application. I just want to point out that under recommendation number 4, should the local government deny the application dies at this point in the process. It doesn't go forward to the Land Commission for consideration. With that in mind, I'll just jump into item R1. Application number ALR 19H01. The property is located at 13235 and 13250 Viola Lane. So as you can see in the map, Viola Lane comes off Yellow Point Road. The history behind this application is that back in 2018, the Land Commission approved the plan to subdivide the parent parcel. So it's the parcels that you see before you, including the 6 parcels at the top there. That was all part of the original parent parcel. The Land Commission approved the 17 lot subdivision. And the idea was that the subdivision would proceed in phases. First phase included the first 6 lots. However, between 2008 and now, there's been a fairly long gap between phase 1 and phase 2, where the Land Commission basically told the applicant they'd have to reapply to proceed with the subdivision, given the length of time between the 2 phases. And so that's what we're dealing with at this point in time. The property owners have made application for what we refer to as phase 2, which includes the creation of 6 new parcels plus the remainder. The property is currently zoned A2, and under that zoning, the minimum parcel size is 2 hectares. All the properties that are being proposed meet the minimum lot requirements under our zoning bylaw. And as you see in the staff report, staff is recommending that the application be forwarded to the Land Commission as is. Any questions from the committee?
Could you lower your presentation so I can see the full screen, please?
Oh, sorry about that.
I see Director Nicholson. Anyone else? Smith. And I seem to have lost Director. Oh no, there she is in the corner. Director Nicholson, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering, when you do subdivisions of ALR land like this, are there opportunities for amenity contributions?
Mr. Limshu.
The answer to that question is not really, given that it is a subdivision, and so they are complying under existing zoning at this point in time. Now, as with subdivisions, there may be discussions around park dedication. However, in this case, the minimum parcel size is 2 hectares or larger. And unfortunately, given the minimum parcel size, it doesn't give us the ability to ask for any sort of park dedication.
Any further comment or question, Director Nicholson? Go ahead, Director Nicholson. Follow up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about how access to the waterfront for the community is handled.
Mr. Limshu.
There is a provision in the Land Titles Act, and because subdivisions approved by the Ministry of Transportation, the duty to secure access to the waterfront lies in their hands. Now, in the Act, and this is generally speaking, there's provision to provide water access at certain intervals along the waterfront. But again, because we're not the approving officer, this requirement lies with the Ministry of Transportation, as they are the approving authority for subdivision.
Director Smith.
Thank you. Through to staff, Area H consistently has issues with water and availability of water. What has that been taken into play with this subdivision that's going to be occurring?
Mr. Limshu.
Through to the chair, as with any subdivision application, again, perhaps I should back up. So this is
And just before you start, Mr. Limshu, could you bring up your picture, please?
Oh,
Activate your video, please.
my video. Okay. Can you see me now?
We can see you now.
Okay,
Please
great.
go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things I failed to mention in my presentation is that approval from the Land Commission is basically one process that the applicant's going to have to go through. Assuming that they get through the ALR, or sorry, the ALC process, they will have to come back to the local government, the regional district, and go through the development permit process. So we will see this application again through the development permit process. As well, ultimately, they will have to receive approval from the Ministry of Transportation, who is the approving authority. So what will happen is, as the approving authority, the Ministry of Transportation issues what's generally referred to as a PLA, preliminary layout approval. And basically, it's a letter which outlines all the conditions that the applicants have to meet. And typically, those requirements would include provision of water, sewage, drainage, and access to each of the proposed lots.
Alternate Director Haim.
Thank you. I'd like to move that it be recommended to the board that application number ALR 19H01, 13235 and 13250 Viola Lane for subdivision within the Agricultural Land Reserve be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission with a recommendation for approval. And I'll speak to it if I get a seconder.
That's moved by Alternate Director Haim, seconded by Director Kuhn. Alternate Director Haim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. When this previously came to the committee, it was referred to the Area H APC for their comment. Unfortunately, as a result of the lack of availability of meetings, they did not hold a formal meeting to discuss it. However, there was a site visit of the APC. I attended, as well as all the members of the Area H APC. We were given a tour of the property, including the area towards the waterfront and the larger parcel, which has a marshy area. And in the discussions and the questions of the APC members at that meeting, it was my interpretation that the APC members themselves saw no challenge with this subdivision. In fact, there was comment of one of the APC members that with the smaller parcel sizes and therefore greater affordability, there's a potential there of actually increasing some of the agricultural work, recognizing there's very little going on that property agriculturally currently. So in terms of it, the fact that there's the recommendation that it be forwarded for approval is consistent with the previous approvals that existed for the property, and I believe it's consistent with the opinion of the individual members of the APC, despite the fact there wasn't the opportunity to have a formal meeting and a recording of that.
Thank you, Alternate Director Haim. So we have a motion that has been read, moved, and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this item? Director Nicholson?
Thank you. Sorry, I lost my space here because of my mute button. I have a little bit of concern about this report in conjunction with the next report, because I feel that we don't have a very clear agricultural policy about how we respond to these in terms of the ALC. So for example, in the next report, the staff recommend that the application be forwarded to the ALC without a recommendation, which enables the ALC to take full responsibility for assessing the appropriateness of subdivision. And I feel that this food security issue is very important. And while you might want to subdivide a piece of agricultural land and perhaps make it more productive agriculturally, there will be potentially greater water use, which may impact other properties around it and other agricultural production around it. And I feel that we sort of lack information from an agricultural point of view. And so I'm not really comfortable that we should be recommending one way or the other. I think it would be enough to send the application to the ALC to do their agricultural determination on.
Thank you. Alternate Director Haim.
Thank you. Just speaking to that, yeah, I do recognize that there appears to be an inconsistency between the treatment of the two. From my standpoint, or at least with regards to the staff recommendations, from my standpoint, I'm relying on the information that I've received previously with regards to the previous applications and approvals related to the property, as well as the advice and counsel of the APC members, recognizing in this case here, the individuals are very familiar with the area, as well as very familiar with the property, as well as familiar with the needs and requirements related to agriculture in the area. So from my standpoint here, again, I understand that appearance of inconsistency between the two recommendations, but I stand by the idea of approving this one or sending it for approval.
Seeing no other indications to speak, I will now call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. The motion carries. Mr. Limshu, R2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to switch back over. Okay, with respect to application R2, number ALR 20H01, located on Carmichael Road. This application is to create one new parcel within the ALR. The applicants are asking for the subdivision to basically create a lot for a relative. In this case, it would be their daughter. Under the existing zone, the parcel does not meet a minimum parcel size. However, because it is a subdivision request for a family member, Section 514 of the Local Government Act comes into play, which allows for a parcel to be created smaller than what's permitted in the zone. There are a number of conditions associated with creating a parcel for a family member or a relative under Section 515. For example, the owner of the property has had to own the property for at least 5 years. The application must be to create a parcel for an immediate family member, so mother, father, son, daughter. The use has to remain in place for at least 5 years after the subdivision is approved. And the parcel must be at least 1 hectare in size. In this case, the proposed lot 1 is 2.2 hectares and the proposed lot 2 will be 1.2 hectares. So they do that minimum parcel size. The recommendation from staff is to forward the application. Any questions?
You cut out at the end, and I believe you said the recommendation from staff is to forward without a recommendation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. If you could lower your presentation, and I will look to creating a speakers list, and this is again, is this area H? It is. So look to directors. Do you have any questions for staff? Director Yanni Donardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Limshu. I was wondering the section 514, the family member, then after 5 years, can they not also sell that property?
Mr. Limshu.
Simple property, if they've had it for their family for 5 years, then they can sell it. Is that correct?
The quick answer to that is yes, they can.
Thank you.
Director Smith.
So a similar question for Mr. Limshu, please, is can the other family that's the original owner of the property sell prior to 5 years? So the one family member has to stay for 5 years, but the other parcel, they can leave and sell anytime? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Limshu.
Through to the chair, the act doesn't specifically regulate the ownership component. It basically speaks to the use of the parcel and at the time of subdivision that the parcel is created for a family member.
Seeing no other hands, I will turn to the director for the area.
Thank you. I move that it be recommended to the board that application number ALR 20H01 PID 005787246 be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission without a recommendation.
Seconded by Director Wilson. We have a resolution moved and seconded. I'll turn to the director for comment.
Thank you. As mentioned, the previous application had at least been referred to the APC and they'd been able to provide input through the site visit. As a general idea, I don't oppose the Carmichael Road application. However, recognizing the process and, in my opinion, the importance of the APC side of things, I'm more comfortable forwarding this without a recommendation, and as mentioned in the report, at this stage leaving it in the hands of the ALC. It is a relatively low impact type of an application in terms of lot size or lot number and size. However, in terms of precedent and consistency for the future, I'm more comfortable without a recommendation.
Thank you, Alternate Director Haim. Director Yanni Donardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not comfortable. I would actually, I have a real challenge with this section 514 and what happens and that properties get split up again. We've really tried to pay attention to these, and actually over the years that I've been on the board, there's been a lot of denial and not sending it forward to the ALC. I think that we're just creating once again where agricultural land is split up and then in 5 years it's sold again, and it's more of a commodity for people. I'm not comfortable with the recommendation to refer it. I would just prefer that we deny it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni Donardo. Seeing no other hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? Hands in favor. 1, 2. I have 6 in favor. Any opposed? We have 2 opposed. That motion carries. And I'll just briefly comment in regards to these items. I think that Director Yanni Donardo and I can both share the sentiment that sometimes on these files we have to kind of hold our nose and follow with what the staff are recommending that we do. I acknowledge you, Director Nicholson. I'll get to you when I'm finished my comments. This is provincial domain, and we have had the ALC attend to our board in the past, and they have made comments that they want us to make recommendations or they want us to kill applications, and that this is a process that's somewhat external to us, and I believe that having read through all the many attachments with this, that it looks to me that the staff got this one right, and we don't want to see agricultural parcels used for practices other than agriculture. But in this case, I think this one, it's right to send it forward without any recommendations. So that resolution has passed, and I see that Director Nicholson wanted to make a comment after the fact as well. Recognize Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I would just appreciate, because I can't see people, if you could tell me who is voting in the negative. You could say names, please.
I can do that. In the last one, it was Director Smith and Director Yanni DiNardo who voted in the negative. And with that, we will go to our next item, which is R3. And I will now turn to Mr. Limshu with another presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So item R3 relates to application number DP18D04. Basically, it's a application for development permit, and it pertains to the property located at 5301 Chester Road. The diagram that you see before you outlines the site plan for proposed phase 3. And so I guess that's a point I should make, is that this project is a 3-phase project. Phases 1 and 2 have been completed. And just to speak to one of the items mentioned earlier during the public input, we are quite aware that there were a number of items outstanding during phase 1 and 2. And through this process and working with the applicant has addressed those outstanding items. The proposal before the committee relates to phase 3, and that will include the ultimate development of 5 buildings in that phase 3. Phase 3 is the last and final phase of the project. Not only does it include the development of the buildings on site, but it'll also include extensive landscaping and improvements along the frontage of Chester Road. You will see in the staff report, and I think this was also alluded to by the input, address, there are a number of attachments. They include the site plans, building elevation, landscaping, but they also include stormwater management, geotech report, lighting plan associated with the project. The project does meet and comply with the bylaws under the existing zoning. Staff, in reviewing the application, feels that the applicant has met the intent of the development permit guidelines and is recommending that the development permit be approved. Are there any questions?
Yin, your mic is off.
Your mic is off. Chair Morrison.
Thank you. Got it. So I've got Director Yanni DiNardo and Acton. These are questions for staff at this point.
Thank you.
So Director Yanni DiNardo, I've got Director Nicholson afterwards. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Through you to Mr. Limshu, thank you. I'm happy to see that this was a very good report. It has been a challenging community in landscape, and thinking of industrial sites quite a bit differently than we used to years ago. I do have a question on, and I spoke to Mr. Limshu earlier on some of my concerns, and I'm quite happy with the answers, but one of them that I'd forgotten to ask about was, I believe there's only 2 plugs for the electric vehicles, and I really feel that in the future we're going to be needing a lot more. Is there any comment on that? And am I correct with 2 electric car charging stations.
Mr. Limshu, would you activate? Oh, you are. Please go ahead.
So, as a general comment to that, with respect to the provision of EV outlets and charging stations, a number of municipalities, what they've done is they've included a requirement within their parking bylaw. I will pass it over to the file planner, Lauren Wright, to speak to the actual charging stations that are being proposed here.
Ms. Wright.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. So through to the chair, there are 2 electrical vehicle charging outlets that will be provided. The parking portion of the Area D zoning bylaw only requires 1. So they have provided an additional 1 because they're getting a unit that has the ability to charge 2 at once.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Follow-up Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. Is there an opportunity for us to request more charging stations at this time? I think that it's, once the infrastructure is in place, having more charging stations, I think, would be a benefit. Can we request from the applicant to actually add more?
So before we go to staff, I think that having had some discussion with staff on this one, we could certainly make a request, but my understanding is that the applicants have met all of the requirements of the development permit. I would suggest that we need to go and revisit our parking bylaws or parking requirements to ensure that those are put in place. But I will go to staff and ask what their thoughts are on additional requests if we were to move forward. Mr. Limshu or Ms. Wright, who would like to take this?
Through to the chair. Basically, Mr. Chair, you've stolen all my thunder. You're quite correct. The applicant is meeting the requirements under our zoning bylaw, and certainly while we could ask, they're not compelled to provide any additional charging stations. We can certainly take a look at our bylaws to see whether or not we can amend it for future projects. But at this point in time, they are meeting the requirements of our bylaw.
Final question, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that they're meeting our current ones, and I'm sure with our harmonization and our new OCP that it will look quite a bit different in the future. I'm just asking if there's an opportunity for us to, in good faith, to ask the applicant if they could add more. I think it would be of benefit to the workers that will be there, and it is something that's going to be well received and needed in the future. So I'm just asking if that is something that we can just do.
Ms. Wright or Mr. Limshu, can you carry that message through to the applicants once you've dealt with this issue?
Yes, we can certainly pass the request along to the applicants. You don't see an issue with that. I think from the applicants' perspective, they would like to see their development permit move forward. Certainly, they can consider and decide whether or not they want to add to what's being proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to comment on the charging request. Perhaps Director Yanni DiNardo is not aware, but electric cars now are being built to go 600 kilometers and more soon. So, some are at 600 already. So that I don't think the need of charging stations is even going to be an issue. And all our gas stations will be replaced with electric charging stations. That will be superchargers. And it'll just be a matter for those who can't carry the charge. I don't even think it's going to be something that will be part of a development permit in the future. We don't supply people with gasoline at the moment, so I don't even think we'll be supplying people with electricity. And we don't drive 600 kilometers in a day to go to work or to stop at a business. So I think having 2 chargers is actually something to celebrate. But my question is, this was a really thorough application, And I'm curious, how do we follow up on these landscape plans? Because as Director Yanni DiNardo pointed out, we look at industrial or light industrial areas a little differently, and it would be nice that they actually look nice in our community, especially where in most of our communities where it's integrated into the community. So how does the CBRD follow up? And I'd like to really see those plans follow through, and for something so that it's an improvement instead of making things worse.
I was going to go to the planner, if that's okay, Mr. Limshu.
Through the chair. So there's a couple things here. With respect to the development permits, we are requiring the applicant to provide a landscaping plan created by a professional landscape designer or architect, sorry. But the biggest hammer that we have with respect to ensuring that folks follow through on their landscaping plan is the security requirement. In this particular case, the applicant is going to be required to provide landscape security in and around $221,000. And so in order for the applicant to receive their funds back or receive their security back, they're going to have to demonstrate that they've completed the works. In this particular case, there'll be both sign off from the professional architect representing the applicant, as well as a on-site review by staff to ensure all the works are completed at the end of the day before the security is released.
Do you have a follow-up, Director Acton?
Thank you. And with the follow-up, would staff visit the site to ensure that?
Yes,
nodding from Director Lynch,
okay.
or Mr. Lynch. Yes.
Through the chair, yes, it's standard practice for staff to go out and make sure that the works are actually in place before releasing any of the security.
Thank you. Next is Director Nicholson. Director Nicholson is waving me off. Director Smith.
Thank you. Through the chair to staff, one of the things that I see in the design is a lot of parking, but minimal entrance exit to this property. And to me, it looks so congested for vehicles to try to maneuver around. A lot of the parking lots that you see designed these days are not necessarily designed for people maneuvering around. Can you kind of comment on, I'm trying to find entrance and exit off the highway into the property, and then I just see it being quite complicated for people to maneuver within such tight space.
Mr. Limshu?
Comment on that?
There are two access points being proposed off Chester Road. So there is no direct access off the highway for this site. The property does not front the highway, just to be clear. But there are two access and egress points on the site being proposed. With respect to circulation, we did have a lot of discussion with the applicant and the designers about that to ensure that the widths are adequate, not only to accommodate the folks going to the business, but also the delivery trucks that are going to be servicing those businesses as well.
Anything further, Director Smith?
So I may not be able to understand the design, but are there sidewalks around all the buildings so the people will park, people will get on sidewalks, and they will be able to maneuver around without walking into areas where the cars are parked?
Mr. Limshu.
Yes, that was one of the points we raised with the applicants. And so the project is designed to have sidewalks immediately adjacent to the sides of the buildings. We may not be able to see it clearly because the site plan is at a small scale. But yes, the answer to that is there is provision made for pedestrians to walk through the site without having to walk onto the driving portion. The only time that you would enter onto the driving portion is if you cross from one building to the next.
Does that conclude your questions, Director Smith? Final question?
Final question. So I see the 2 entrance exits. Is that adequate, or will it be Modi that makes that decision?
Mr. Limshu?
Those access points are in keeping and consistent with our bylaws. So with respect to the development permit, they are complying to the regulations and standards that we require under our zoning bylaw. Or sorry, zoning and parking bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. I'll go to Director Salmon next, then Director Yanni DiNardo. Director Salmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the Eevee parking issue, I'd just like to support Director Yanni DiNardo's idea. As an Eevee owner myself, it's noticing that it's increasingly hard to find a charger in commercial areas. And we're only at less than 10% EV ownership now and rising steadily. So I think we really do need to look at our bylaw and change that. But I think it's important in this case to also try to get this one in. And our range is 170K. So yes, you can pay 60,000 or more and get a 600 range. But there's all sorts of people out there with much less range that really do need charging spots in commercial areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Salmon. Back to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move this application. If I guess Cinder would also like to speak to it.
We have a mover. Is there a seconder for the resolution? Seconded by Director Salmon. And go ahead, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. I would like to recognize that the staff has done a really good job and the applicant as well. This has been a long time coming. And I look forward to it. It is the entrance actually more like to Duncan. So it's very highly visible. It's off the highway, but very visible. And I appreciate that we'll be looking at industrial parks in a different way and also accommodating. We have the off-road walking trails. We worked really hard on that as a Parks Department. The Parks Commission was wanting an off-road walking trail. The Chester Road is treacherous for people. So appreciate all the work that's been done on that. And they can then follow the off-road walking trail and go up the overpass. And hopefully then it's on Area E side that we would continue with the off-road and the safe pedestrian passage for a community that lives behind there. So I'm happy to see this move forward, and I would still recommend if there could be just a couple more EV chargers, it would just be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. And I'll just comment briefly, being a director that was around with Director Yanni DiNardo at the beginning of this process. And, not all developments are perfect. And it was noted there were some deficiencies and challenges and questions. And I too want to thank staff and Ms. Wright. I think that this was an excellent report. It was very informative. And I think we've also want to thank the applicants as well, who have done a good job working with staff to bring forward I think the best possible scenario, absent the need for maybe some more electric vehicle plugins. But this is a very supportable development permit, and encourage everyone to support it. So with that, I will now call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Ms. Legault, just a quick question for you. When will these items be going through to our next board meeting? What's the date of our next board meeting?
Our next board meeting is May 13th, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So just for those watching online, that recommendations from today's meeting will go to the May 13th board meeting. And I'd also like to take this moment just to remind people watching that may have questions about this file or any of the previous ones or upcoming ones, that if you could please form your questions and submit them to Ms. Legault. And her email address is legislativeservices, all one word, all lowercase, legislativeservices@cvrd.bc.ca. How's everybody doing? Thumbs up? Good. Next item, Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item, R4, relates to application number RZ18A02. I believe most of the committee is familiar with the site. That's the Eevee Resort. The application consists of 4 subject properties, which are basically located at the summit of Malhat Pass. Combined, it's approximately 36 hectares, which is approximately 89 acres of land that we're talking about. The 4 parcels that we're talking about are located at 642, 600, and 666 Evadora Lane, and that's generally referred to as the Eevee Resort site. The 4th property is located on the lower portion of Evadora Lane, previously known as the Prancing Horse Pony development. The current owner has acquired the 4 properties. So a bit of a history, over the last several decades, the properties have basically evolved from single-family dwellings to bed and breakfast, and later to small luxury hotel. Over that time period, there have been extensive expansions of buildings, uses, and not necessarily receiving the appropriate permits in doing so. The current owners have put forward the application to amend the bylaws, and what they're proposing to do is they're seeking to bring all 4 parcels into compliance with the applicable CBRD regulations in order to legalize the number of existing uses, as well as to allow for future expansion on the site. So on one hand, it's a bit of a housekeeping process with respect to these bylaw amendments, but again, it will also allow for the future expansion of the site. What this does, it provides, if approved, it would provide certainty for not only the CBRD, but also the applicants. So what you see in front of you, the slide indicates the existing designations. And currently, on the 4 properties, the existing land use designations under the OCP include rural resource, rural residential, tourist commercial. What's being proposed here is to amend the land use designation, so at the end of the day, all 4 properties will be designated tourist commercial to reflect the existing and future use for the property. Similarly, under the existing zoning, the 4 properties are subject to a variety of different zones currently, and they range from rural resource to commercial 4 and rural residential 2. The idea is that under the bylaw amendment, all 4 properties will be rezoned to a comprehensive development zone 5. This is basically a site-specific zone to accommodate, again, the existing uses as well as future expansion envisioned by the owners. The slide that you see before you gives you an indication of the challenges this site. As you can see, the contour lines indicate the steepness of the slope. So the reality is that the site will not only be limited by what's being proposed under the bylaw amendments, but they're also limited and challenged by the actual topography of the property. So the slide that you see before you, where it's indicated potential future build out, the blocks in red indicate possible future development locations for the future expansion of the resort. And these are basically predicated on the fact that those proposed development sites are in areas where the topography lends itself for development to occur. Within the proposed zoning bylaws, generally speaking, The expansion would allow a change in the existing use from 38, I'll call it 38 accommodation units to a maximum of 105 accommodation units. It would also provide for employee accommodation as well. So right now they are showing or indicating potentially 10 units for employee accommodation. With respect to the actual zone itself, the uses will be expanded to allow for expanded hospitality and personal service uses. This includes a future spa on the property. It'll also expand the food and beverage services and allow for a small scale artisan food and beverage production on the site. It'll allow for event facilities to support a wide range of events, which includes retreats, weddings, theater, sort of educational conferences, those sorts of things. And lastly, there'll be a small retail component permitted to allow for a gift shop, as an example. At this stage, we are talking about rezoning the property or amending the zoning, and that specifically speaks to the land use for the site. Moving forward, if the bylaws are approved by the regional district, the applicants will have to come back and obtain development permits as they move through the various phases of their project. So the process doesn't necessarily stop here. There will be additional processes moving forward. Lastly, I just wanted to outline for the committee, the applicants are proposing, have submitted a proposal for amenity contribution. And basically there are 3 items associated with the amenity contribution. There will be the provision for a conservation covenant for approximately 37% of the lands. So on the diagram that you see before you, that includes the area in this light green, top of the property. There's also a cash contribution related to the equivalent of $25 for every square meter of new building area being proposed for development. And lastly, the third component would be a $15,000 donation to the Malahat Volunteer Fire Department. I know that there were some questions related to the infrastructure, water in particular, but in the attachment of the staff report, we did provide copies of the reports related to servicing the site. And as you know, we do rely on the professional consultants to provide input and recommendations with respect to developments on any particular piece of property within the regional district. With that, are there any questions?
Could you lower your presentation so I can see my colleagues?
Oh, sorry about that.
And were you wanting to take questions, or were you going to go to the planner on the file as well? I guess straight to you first, Mr. Limshu. So I've got Director Acton and Smith. Director Acton.
Thank you. I can wait. I was going to move the recommendation because I feel comfortable with the application. I've spoken to staff and beforehand with a couple questions that weren't clear to me, and I think I'm really happy with the choice of amenity to go to Kerry Park. I think that's fair to the community. So when you're ready for a mover, I'm happy to move it.
Okay, I will go to Director Smith next. This is questions for staff.
Thank you very much through the chair to staff. I noticed in one of the reports from regarding the water licenses, have the groundwater licenses been sorted out for this property? And also, will there be enough water in the area to provide for what looks like a fair amount of expansion, building, and all the different services on that property.
Mr. Limshu, those are more development permit than building questions, but go ahead now.
I will redirect to the staff planner.
Ms. Wright?
Through to the chair. So the applicant has applied for the water licenses, but I don't believe they've heard back. In terms of, and I do know that there is quite a backlog for water licenses. We're dealing with several within the CVRD, and it is a lengthy process through the province. In terms of the necessary water for future development, the report does state that there is enough there. They have done projections based on the maximum build out that the applicant has proposed. And it is important to note again that it's just it's the maximum that would be that they would be able to build on the site based on topography. But with that, to rely on the professional who wrote the report does state that there is enough water on the site for what is currently there, as well as the proposed build out.
Thank you. Follow-up, Director Smith?
Just another question regarding sewer. Is there a system in place that can handle the additional build out, or is that still to come with other permits?
Mr. Limshu or Ms. Wright?
So once again, the same report does talk about what's there now, as well as the build out, and the report does list requirements that will need to be met upon future build out. But for now, the sewage is taken care of, and there are provisions in place should a development permit be sought after for potential future development. They will most likely have to do improvements in order for both water and sewage on the site.
Thank you. Go to Director Salmon. I've got myself on the list. Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question about traffic. I know this came up at the APC and elsewhere. Maybe a question for staff, just generally, what's the impact on traffic, especially the somewhat dangerous left turn off Whitaker onto the highway?
I believe there's a fairly substantial report in there, but turn to Ms. Wright or Ms. Limshu. Ms. Wright?
In terms of the traffic impact assessment that was provided, it does state in there that the Whitaker Road left lane turnoff has been kind of on the province's watch list for years, and that it is they are actively monitoring the site, and if more traffic is noticed, that they will close off that left turn lane and redirect it south to the South Shawnigan turnoff. But the province has been looking at that prior to any increased proposed development at this site.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that the traffic impact study attributed 25 to 30% of the increase in that intersection at peak hours to be from the villa once it's fully built out. So there is some contribution, but I agree. It seems when they move everyone down to the South Shawnigan, that should address that, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got myself on the list, and my question actually might be just for Director Salmon. I believe this is a Area A file. It is, and just looking at the amenity contributions and specifically the fire department ones, do you feel that you as director and your community is comfortable with the amenity contribution package that's being proposed in this rezoning?
Thanks. That's a great question. Yeah, there's three parts, as Mr. Limshu was saying, to the amenity, but generally, yes, the fire department, certainly, the conservancy, the covenant on the land, certainly. The third one, the biggest one, which is the amenity contribution proposed for Kerry Park. I did have some questions about the timing for that, because normally it would be paid at zoning stage, but we've got the COVID crisis has hit the hotel and hospitality really hard. So the applicants had asked to defer the payment of that until the building permit stage, which I can support. But the only question I had for committee really on that was the destination. I had proposed, along with the Parks Commission, that we would think about, rather than that going to Kerry Park, that it go to the Area Parks Commission or Area Parks Acquisition Fund. Logic being that this is, if we could work on this outstanding problem of the Malahat Scenic Drive, protecting that corridor, which is being chipped away at, as everyone knows, and that we'd be a little more directly related to tourism and a little more local to have the funds available for ultimately some sort of parkland purchase or improvement to that scenic drive right in the local area. So I don't know if this is the point to suggest or request that change, but I've spoken to Mr. Limshu about it, and either now or in future, maybe that could be considered. It is okay with the proponent. We've checked that already.
Well, I guess we can go through to Mr. Limshu, but we're proposing that this move forward based on the recommendation that's before you. Mr. Limshu, do you have any comment on the changing of the destination of part of the amenity from one receiving area to another?
Yeah, I've talked briefly with the applicant about that, and they have no objections to where the money ultimately ends up. I mean, the fact of the matter is they're going to be on the hook to provide that contribution at the time of building permit. You know, with respect to moving the application forward, I mean, from their perspective, they wouldn't want to see this issue hold up the continued processing of their amendment bylaws or their application. You know, they would leave it to the committee and the regional district to decide where those funds are ultimately end up. Now, we would deal with the contributions through a covenant on title, which speaks to the commitments for the three entities as the amenity contribution. And so certainly, you know, if things change between now and prior to adoption of this bylaw, we can certainly look at amending that covenant to accommodate the appropriate wording based on direction from the committee.
Well, just before I go to the next speaker, who Director Nicholson, I acknowledge you, but just a moment, can I ask Ms. Legault if the committee were to recommend this resolution that's been published to the board, is there any difficulties in a later amendment to that covenant for directing of those funds?
No, the board can certainly make a decision at a later date to supersede the one that's being made today.
So this resolution that's before us could be moved as published and then could be amended at a later date then?
Correct.
Thank you. I will go to Director Nicholson and I'll put Director Salmon back on the list. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I have two concerns about this based on the conversation that I'm listening to. One is whether the $15,000 for the fire department is adequate for, I'm not very clear on what kind of services the Malahat department is able to provide, but $15,000 doesn't seem to be very much given the development that's happening up in that area. Number two is water. I am really concerned about the water situation and whether there is adequate information about the aquifers to make comment about the water. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, I was actually thinking maybe some of the amenity contribution could go towards putting in monitoring wells up there so that we get better information.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. I believe the 15,000 amount was a figure that was generated by the Malahat Fire Department as far as indicating what their amenity contribution would be, and I would stand to be corrected if I'm wrong on that. And Mr. Limshu, would you like to go back to addressing the water question and the professional advice that we've received?
Thank you. So to answer the question, yes, the $15,000 contribution towards the Malahat Fire Department is predicated on past discussions that the applicants had with the fire department, and Ms. Wright may want to correct me on that if she was privy to those discussions, but that's where that number came from. With respect to the water, as indicated, we do rely quite a bit on the professional consultants and their recommendations. However, moving forward, there is a number of processes that the applicant's going to have to go through. So rezoning the property or amending the bylaw to accommodate future growth is one process, but we still have to go through a development permit process as well as a building permit process. And certainly as we work our way through it, there will be more detailed information required of the applicant to ensure that there's adequate services available. So not just the water component, but also the sewer as previously discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Ms. Wright, anything to add?
Just in terms of the contribution to the Malahat Volunteer Fire Department, and to address kind of a question that came, or a comment that came in from the public, we did negotiate with the Malahat Volunteer Fire Department quite a bit. And in the end, they did end up choosing, they sent a list to the applicant with an itemized list with prices of equipment that they desire. And the highest price item, I believe, was around $13,800. And so rounded up with tax, that's kind of where the $15,000 came from. They are able to use it for anything. So in the covenant, it just says a $15,000 donation. So in the end, if they choose to spend it on training or other types of equipment, they aren't limited to that. However, that's where the $15,000 amount came from.
So just to remind everyone, this is the land use discussion and rezoning. I'll go to Director Nicholson for a follow-up question. I've got Director Salmon following Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So thank you for the clarification on the fire department. So on the water situation, they will have to apply for water licenses to conduct their commercial operations. And I understand from the report that they haven't got those yet. And they will be expanding them, so they will be required to do new licensing for those expanded commercial operations. And I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity moving forward when we think about these kinds of things of requiring, working with the province to require monitoring wells where we might benefit from them overall. Because we have so little groundwater information that's that really paints the picture, and I'm just trying to figure out a way that we can start putting in place that kind of an information base for making these decisions. So we rezone something, but then have to put in a monitoring well so that there's some idea as we go forward about water availability.
I think it's a great and complementary idea that would be well received in regional services for discussion under our drinking water and watershed protection. But I'm a little reluctant for the Electoral Area Services Committee and the CVRD's electoral areas to have to be trading away one of our an amenity that we might receive that might be of benefit to our parks or to our fire departments, and to have to consider a monitoring well as an amenity contribution. I think the provinces should be requiring monitoring wells where there are aquifers under pressure. So I think your point is well taken, and I hope you raise it again at regional services so that we can have maybe a broader approach to all of our underground water resources, and that they can be better monitored. So With that, I will go to Director Salmon, and then we might have a motion on this item. Director Salmon.
Actually, that's what I wanted to do. Say I'm generally very supportive. I think this is positive, and I'd like to move the recommendation.
Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Alternate Director Haim. And I guess I volunteered to read these out, so I guess I get to read it. This is, yeah, I know. The recommendation that it be recommended to the board that OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for application number RZ18A02 be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second readings. 2, that prior to consideration of adoption of OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for application RZ18A02, a restrictive covenant regarding property restrictions, land conservation, and community amenity contributions be registered on title. 3, that the referrals for OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for application number RZ18A02 to the Ministry of Forest, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Malahat Fire, Malahat Nation, Stumanis First Nation be accepted. 4, that a public hearing be scheduled for OCP and zoning amendment bylaws for application number RZ18A02 with directors from electoral areas A, B, and F as delegates. And that has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I count no hands opposed. That motion carries unanimously. And I think it would be more than appropriate at this time to note that the for an application like this, when we do get to a public hearing policy and when we have the opportunity, if it is possible, these are one of those applications that support by other directors in attendance. Should we be able to have a formal public hearing, coming to attend one of these things of a file of this magnitude would be helpful. So I'm looking at, we have R5, and R5 is an application that may take a few moments. Do you want to plow through, or should we take a short break? We've been sitting here for almost 90 minutes. What's your pleasure? How about thumbs up for a quick break? Well, we got a few that want a quick break, and the rest of us want to plow through. So I think the majority wins in this one. We're going to plow through. We'll go to R5, Mr. Limshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So item R5 relates to application number RZ20C01. The subject property is located at 1134 Chapman Road. The applicants are seeking an amendment to the existing RR3 zone, which is a rural residential zone, which would in fact, basically would have the effect of permitting a small scale craft distillery on the subject property. The applicants are looking to utilize an existing building on the site. The map before you just gives you an idea of the location of the property. The parcel is approximately 0.8 hectares in size. So as you can see with the surrounding properties, it is basically a rural residential area. The photograph that you see in front of you is the existing accessory building that's currently sitting on the property. And the idea is that the craft distillery use would be contained within this existing building. The applicants have actually spent a bit of time doing their research, not only for the proposed business that they're proposing, but also in terms of reviewing our OCP and the intent of our OCP policies and guidelines for this particular area. They do recognize that the goal is to preserve the rural residential character of the neighborhood. And certainly what they're trying to do is to ensure that that is maintained. The applicants live on the property. And so they would basically treat this as, for lack of a better term, a home-based business, similar to what you would see on other properties that have home-based businesses. The building that you see before you is approximately 225 square meters in size. Of that, the applicants are proposing to utilize 60 square meters of floor space for their own private garage. And so the remaining 165 square meters would be put towards using the building for the craft distillery. Within that area, it would include an education area, obviously the production area, as well as accommodate a small sales and sampling area. I think the key with respect to this application, again, is the applicants are making a concerted effort to ensure that the rural residential character and ambiance of the neighborhood is maintained. And so the proposed bylaw that's before the committee for consideration basically tries to emulate that of a small home-based business. So it's got a lot of the characteristics and similarities that you would find within the rules and regulations around home-based business. But staff felt that it would be prudent to create, we'll call it a site-specific zone. So rather than just simply amending the text under the RR3 zone to permit this kind of use outright, the idea and the recommendation by staff is to create a site-specific RR3D zone to allow for this this type of use. In keeping with the small-scale aspect of the business, the applicants will have to comply with provincial requirements. And so provincial craft distillery licensing rules do limit the total volume of annual production to less than 100,000 liters per year. This amount is actually similar to the water requirements for a single family home. So again, the production of the end product and the use and infrastructure of the property isn't out of line. The resources to accommodate the proposed use aren't out of line with that of a single family home in the area. And again, this lends itself for the sort of small scale aspect of the proposal. In the package that was provided to the committee, attachment E, the applicants do discuss more extensively potential concerns. And as I mentioned before, they've done quite a bit of homework for this project. But within attachment E, they speak to issues around fire hazard, odor, water consumption, waste treatment, traffic, and noise. One of the interesting aspects of this is that the applicants are proposing to reuse the byproducts from the production of the production of the end product as much as they can. Also, as a requirement, they are looking to source materials locally. So not only is it in keeping with the local character of the area, but it's also supporting complementary businesses locally as well. This slide is just generally a summary, most of which I was spoken to. The applicants did canvass the neighborhood, so the neighbors are aware of what's being proposed. That information is conveyed in the applicant's package to the regional district. the long and short of it is staff believes that the proposal has sufficient merit moving forward to the next stage. This is a little bit, the recommendation is a little bit unique in that typically we would be recommending first and second reading to a proposed bylaw. In this case, we're suggesting first reading only. By granting first reading, if that is approved by the board, it allows ourselves and the applicant to work together to firm up the covenant that would accompany the application. So in order to ensure that the rural residential character is maintained, we would be regulating the future development of the site, both through the bylaw as well as through the restrictive covenant, to ensure that the small scale aspect also just maintained. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Limshu. And could you lower your presentation? And I just want to quickly, once that's down, ask the other directors if they found that Mr. Limshu's audio was somewhat muffled, or was it just my headset where it came through kind of muffled? So Mr. Limshu, I think you need to speak to IT about getting a better headset so that we can hear every word that you speak to us. So I've got Director Acton, Smith, myself, Director Wilson, anyone else? Haim, hang on. And Nicholson. Did I miss anyone? Okay, so this is questions for staff on this file. We can wait for comments and other discussion until we have a resolution on the floor. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. Can you just clarify? I think you spoke to it, but I just want to be clear that with this rezoning, there would be a change in a tax rate, because if we are requiring that these type of distilleries are usually in a light industrial area or the appropriate zoning, I think that this business as well should be taxed to that regard. Can you clarify that?
Mr. Limshu.
The question related to tax rate is a little bit outside of my expertise, but typically in my experience in dealing with BC assessment, BC assessment does typically do site visits, and where there's an improvement or a change in zoning, typically they are following up on that aspect to ensure that the property is being assessed accordingly. That assessed value then translates into the mill rate, which ultimately leads to the tax rate that we all pay when we get our property tax bill.
Yeah, my understanding is it's based on actual use for their tax rate, so there will be probably a blended assessment of part residential and part commercial light industrial. I see Mr. Tippett's activated his video, so it looks like he wants to lean in on this one. So Mr. Tippett, you're next.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Chair, and Director Acton, for your question. To be a little more precise about what Frank was saying, anytime we adopt the zoning amendment bylaw, BC Assessment gets a copy of it, and so it's sort of an active notice that goes from us to assessment, which allows them to review what uses are actually occurring. So rather than just a spot check that might catch it in 5 years, they do get notice immediately if the amendment is adopted. I just wanted to be clear about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Tippett. Second question, Director Acton.
Thank you. I also noticed that there's no amenity contribution, and although this is small and it's still an opportunity and a gift that they are increasing the value of their property, and this allows the community, even if it's just a small amenity, to help move things forward. So perhaps something like funding for Fisher Road water quality testing or, you know, something small so that the community is still moving forward. You know, I'd like to see something there.
Mr. Limshu.
I will redirect to Mr. Tippett because he has had discussions directly with the applicant. I'm not sure if Amenity Contributions came up in any of his previous discussions.
Mr. Tippett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the applicants haven't proposed any kind of amenity package with it. And I suspect, as Director Act is alluding to, maybe that's because it's a relatively modest proposal in scope, perhaps small enough that they didn't feel that it was necessary to propose an amenity, or maybe it didn't even cross their minds. Staff didn't raise it. However, what I would say is if the committee is wishing to accept the recommendation that staff has made in this case, they could also add to our upcoming covenant discussion the question of amenity, and then we could report back about covenant provisions and the results of an amenity discussion, if that was the wish.
Thank you, Mr. Tippett. My next person on the list is Director Smith.
Through the chair to staff, first, I really think this is a great idea for a small, rural, micro business. I think that all our communities are looking for types of businesses like this to have people driving through our communities and enjoying parts, little pieces here and there, and not big monster buildings. I did like the wheelbarrow that was in the photo there, and I'm going to have to find out where you get a wheelbarrow like that. But my question, now that I've finished, is to do with the septic system and having a distillery. I know that belongs to Island Health. So does that come under a different permit area? Just a question regarding that.
Mr. Limshu. Microphone, please. Mr. Limshu, your microphone.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, certainly within the package submitted, the applicants did speak to the septic system, and so they clearly understand that in moving forward with this project, we have to make sure or ensure that the infrastructure, so not just the provision of water, but again, the septic system is sized accordingly to accommodate the project that's being proposed. So we will be having further discussions with them on that to ensure that that is addressed.
Thank you. I've got myself on the list, and just two things of note and through to staff. One in the picture that kind of shook me rigid, so to speak, was the leaning heating oil tank next to the building. And I'm sure that given the material that's been provided by the folks that are making the application, that I'm hoping that Bunker C heating oil isn't going to be one of their sources of energy. And I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but every time I see one of those old oil tanks and know what the cost of remediating when those start leaking are, I hope that they'll address that. The other question that I have, and I don't know if this is an unusual thing or not, but in the drawings, they showed that in the use of the building, that there was going to be personal parking of their own vehicle housed within the building. And it struck me as being a little bit odd that you would have essentially a light industrial activity contained within the building, and yet you'd also have personal use car parking within the same four walls. And so I would ask the professional planning staff whether or not that is a typical use of a space like that. I think I would prefer to see them completely separated just for security purposes and that sort of thing. But do you have any thoughts or opinions on that? Mr. Tippett, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the applicant is probably going to be using that portion of the building for his racing car. He's a motorsports enthusiast, and I don't think it's going to be for the family car or anything like that. I believe he has sort of a racing hobby on the side, which is probably what it's going to be used to house. But as far as mixing the two, yeah, I hadn't really thought of it in that sense. I mean, I don't know that it presents any particular challenges in terms of the building code or anything, but you know, maybe Frank has some thoughts on that. I don't know if Ian McDonald is in on this meeting, maybe he would have some comments there.
Mr. McDonald, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can use mixed occupancy like that, but there'll just be some rules and regulations around fire separation. So uncommon to have mixed use in a building.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Anything to add, Mr. Limshu?
No, I mean, as far as the use is concerned, if they want to use a portion of the building for, whether it be storage or as a garage for either their personal vehicles or, you know, vehicles related to their business, I don't particularly see an issue with that. I think, you know, what we have to keep in mind is that we're trying to treat this along the same lines as any other home-based business or home-based occupation. And so, you know, I think underlying all this is that this is still going to be a residential zone and not a industrial zone.
Fair enough. Thank you. I've got Director Wilson, followed by Haim and Nicholson. Anybody else? Director Wilson. Questions for staff?
Actually, I was just going to move the recommendation if I can.
Okay, I'll come back to you, and your microphone's a little muffled as well, so I will.
Hang on, there. Is that any better?
It's much better. I'll come back to you for the motion.
Thank you.
I'll go to alternate director Haim.
Thank you. Just questions to staff revolving around that covenant. I fully get the idea of the covenant related to nuisance that may be created, but delving into the idea of volume limitations on water, which is provincial jurisdiction, and also the regulation of the feedstocks, which again is covered by provincial legislation when it comes to distilleries. First off, should we be even getting into this? And second of all, do we even have the capacity to monitor it?
Mr. Limshu.
Through the chair, the point is well taken. You know, certainly, you know, the applicants are going to adhere to a number of different rules and regulations. There's our zoning bylaw. There are things that we will include that may not necessarily be covered under provincial jurisdiction, and certainly, you know, if an item's covered provincially, yeah, your point's well taken. Do we need to get involved and let the jurisdiction that's responsible for that ensure that those items are taken care of? I think this is where the discussion, you know, if we are able to move forward, this is going to be all part of the discussion to ensure that there's a high level of comfort that at the end of the day, those items that we deem important to the regional district are addressed, whether it's simply relying on provincial policy or whether or not as a sort of a safety net, if you will, is included in the covenant document.
Thank you. And just before I go to Director Dickelson, who's next on the list, I'd just like to remind anybody that's watching this this meeting that if they have questions that they want to submit for question period, we will be going straight to question period at the end of the regular agenda items, that they forward their question through to Ms. Legault at legislativeservices@cvrd.bc.ca. It's all lowercase. Legislative services is one word. And as I said, we'll be going directly to questions immediately following the last item. And questions for staff, I go to Director Nicholson.
Thank you. My question is about home-based businesses in the neighborhood. I drove by the address today, and this is smack dab in the middle of what Cobble Hill is known for, its lovely residential, quiet, rural residential, big trees, quiet roads kind of a situation. So from my perspective, and from what I've heard from residents in my area, home-based businesses that attract traffic are, people get very concerned with that. So my question is, what's on the books as far as home-based businesses and traffic in this area? And I'm assuming that if it goes to the next stage, then we would have an opportunity to really listen carefully to the community about that issue.
Mr. Limshu or Tippett? Mr. Limshu, you're up.
Oh.
As far as tracking home-based businesses in the area, the regional district does not issue business licenses. So it's a challenge to monitor what sort of home-based businesses are actually there in that particular neighborhood or location. Perhaps Mr. Tippett might have more insight on that.
I'll go to Mr. Tippett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I agree with Director Nicholson. It's definitely a nice residential neighborhood. I'm not aware of a major presence of homes in that immediate vicinity. However, as Frank was saying, I believe in the subsequent discussions on the terms of the covenant, one item of which is the question of nuisance, which includes obviously traffic, we would trying to get a sense of what the scope of site traffic might be, both from the point of view of loading and unloading materials, and also from the point of view of visitors who are coming to the tasting center, and reporting back to committee with some sort of terms in the covenant that are respecting that. The reason that, incidentally, why we're suggesting a covenant rather than the way the draft bylaw is written with the sort of generic home-based business type nuisance regulations in, we think we can substitute very specific regulations for this particular use into a covenant rather than using that. But as I say, site traffic, parking, other nuisances will be points of discussion during any subsequent covenant talks. The other thing about the neighborhood, we did get a sort of petition that was supplied by the applicants. They found and canvassed the neighborhood. We weren't able to share that with the agenda because of privacy issues, people's names and whatnot were on it. But early indications were that there was a measure of support there. And as I believe Director Nicholson was saying, when we go to the next stage, we will obviously be soliciting actively more public input, including the placing of a sign on the property, which isn't there yet because it's premature.
Seeing no other hands up, I will go to Director Wilson. Were you wanting to move the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'll move the recommendation, then I've got a couple of comments if I have a seconder.
It's been moved and seconded by Director Kuhn, and I will go to the director for the area. Anyone else want to have comment on discussion? I'm putting my name. Director Wilson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I've spoken extensively with Mr. Limshu and Mr. Tippett over the last couple of days, and on this particular application, and I'm very satisfied that it's a good application with an existing solid building. There is no extra construction involved here. I'm particularly impressed with the with the attachment E, which was the applicant development rationale, and the fact that they canvassed their neighbours. And I think Mr. Limshaw or Mr. Tippett has mentioned that they can't share that information because of the privacy issues, which I fully understand. I think the directors should also have received a copy of the supplementary information forwarded this morning from the applicants. And I'd just like to draw their attention to paragraph 5 regarding the possibility of being granted a title of the most carbon neutral distillery in the province if this goes ahead, and the way they're going to build this and the way they're going to look after it, especially with the use of local ingredients and the fact that a lot of their byproducts will be reused and repurposed. As we've all seen, other distilleries in the whole province and in the area have stepped up during the present COVID crisis, and they're producing liquids for use in hand sanitizers and everything else. The very fact that they've stepped up as quickly as they can, and not just the distilleries which are producing pure alcohol, such as vodka, but the other ones which are producing beer as well. They're all stepping up and doing stuff. I'm not sure about the an amenity contribution here, because this is something which is a startup business, and this, you know, if we're going to ask for an amenity contribution, could be the straw that broke the camel's back. So I'd like to revisit that at a later time once we know what's happening here. But basically, I honestly think this is a very good application, and I'd like it to go forward to the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Are there any others that would like to weigh it in? We have a resolution on the floor, which I'll read in a moment. Then I will just jump in. And, you know, I have to say that from application perspective, it looks like the applicants have done everything right that they need to do here. They've made a good pitch. They've made some very attractive ideas brought to the table. Had some discussion with Mr. Tippett in regards to what's exactly being planned here from a land use perspective. And as directors that have been here for a little while, you know that when you go and do something that's unique and different, those are the ones that might come back and bite you at some point in the future. And really what the question boils down to, regardless of you know, the great proposal that's being made, we're looking at putting something a little bit beyond a home occupation into a stereotypical Cobble Hill residential area. And that is, it's spot zone that we're going to be putting in. Regulations may change where the provincial government may increase the amount of that can be produced on site. But what it boils down to is we're putting a light industrial process into a residential area. And when you do that, every one of the neighbors around there might be supportive of it today, but in 3 years, when a new neighbor moves in to find out that there's a distillery next door and has concerns, that's when the issues rise. So I'm supporting this, but with the word of caution that when you do something that's a little different, a little outside the norm, those ones tend to come back and bite you. But I think that the applicants have done an excellent job in pitching this idea to us, and staff have done a good job of exploring whether or not it should just be sort of a bulged out home occupation, or whether or not it should be a site-specific zone, and this is what they're advising us. I think that it will be important to hear what the community has to say at whatever version of a public hearing we come up with. So I think at this point, this is supportable to move forward from where I sit, but I just bring that little bit of hesitancy, knowing that we're doing something a little different in a stereotypical Cobble Hill neighborhood, residential neighborhood, and that, you know, I wish them all the success, and let's see how things progress.
Mr. Chair, could I just, your microphone was cutting in and out.
Okay, thank you. Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, through that whole conversation, it was
every second word.
It faded in and out.
Okay, so I'll end by saying that I support this moving forward to the next stage, and the staff doing the additional work that needs to be done. So with that, is there any other comments in regards to this before I call the vote? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Carries unanimously. Excellent job. Thank you, Mr. Limshu. Oh, I didn't read out the resolution. Does anyone want the resolution read? I don't see anybody wanting the resolution read. So that will go through to the May 13th board meeting. And going through the additional items on the agenda, we have Unfinished business, none, no new business. And I believe that takes us to question period. So I will call on Ms. Legault to bring to the questions to the chair to the group.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just bringing them up here. The first item is from Cliff Evans, he references R5, I believe it's actually R4, but says, Mr. Chair, do you have an idea how much a ladder fire truck and facility to store it costs? I think the costs would be in the ballpark of $2 million. The public will end up footing the bill if we don't negotiate for a large contribution towards it now. Will insurance companies be satisfied with the support of remote fire departments to extinguish a fire in a 6-story building? I don't think so. Thank you, Cliff Evans.
In my reading of the report, and I'd love to be corrected after the meeting, but I didn't see anything that was to be above a 3-story structure in the proposed new development. So I don't know where the 6 stories came from. I asked that question of staff as well. And so I don't have an idea what the cost of a ladder truck would be. I think it would be unusual for a rural department of Malahat or Honeymoon Bay or any of the other CVRD fire departments to actually have ladder trucks to fight that sort of fire. But I'd be more than willing to inquire with our public safety people and get back to Mr. Evans on whether or not there's a need in this case and what the approximate costs would be for items such as that. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last item is a submission from Susan Kaufman, and she has 2 questions. The first is regarding item R1, and it reads, are not APC stood down? With due respect to Area H APC and Director Haim, question that recommendations were given in an informal fashion. If the APC has been stood down, is there a concern for liability on the part of the CVRD if the APC is conducting site visits at this time? APCs have been cautioned before to not discuss recommendations at site visits, and she is wondering if staff can comment on this.
Well, staff don't. This is question period for the chair, and I will note as well that if there had been a contrary recommendation coming from the informal discussions that were held in a site visit, I would have had a number of questions for Alternate Director Haim, such as, was the applicant present? Was there an official meeting held or not? He made it very clear that there wasn't an official meeting. It was just a site visit. I would suggest that those were informed opinions that were shared with the director. I'm not sure. He didn't indicate when the timing was that this site visit happened. I don't know whether it was post the stay-at-home public health orders or not, but I think we would have had a little bit of a different discussion and would have brought our parliamentarian in if there would have been suggestions contrary from the informed opinions of the APC members if they were contrary to what the staff recommendation was. But in this case, the director shared the concerns of individual APC members with the committee members, and they are advisory. And the committee and my colleagues here made the decision, and I didn't think that the information that Alternate Director Haim shared was in any way prejudicial or contrary to our process. So I thank him for that information, and I thank Ms. Kaufman for the question. Question number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question number 2 is regarding item R4, and the question is if there is a timeline for the public hearing. And trails have come up in several application discussions. Specifically, some have been decommissioned due to safety concerns related to compliance with CVRD parks and trail standards. When trails are put in as a community or amenity contribution, is there a requirement standards for maintenance, width and base, etc.?
I don't believe there were any items on today's agenda that dealt with decommissioning of any trails and the likes. I do know that that there are amenity contributions made to the CVRD for future potential trails. Some are of a built nature, some aren't. Some are just linear park pathways that aren't built out. And there's generally not a requirement on on someone donating those as part of an amenity contribution to keep them up to any standards. There may be standards for their construction, but ultimately becomes the responsibility of the CVRD to maintain them. And could you repeat the first part of that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. She is asking whether there has been a timeline set for the public hearing for item R4.
So as discussions with our board chair and staff, we have not received any indication or prescribed methods of having public hearings from the province. We are to follow their lead on this. So given that there is no prescribed procedure yet developed, then it would flow naturally that we would not have a timing because we don't have a procedure to implement. So I'm sure that Ms. Kaufman, we will make take every opportunity to inform the public when we have a policy and when we have a prescribed procedure to follow, when the number of public hearings that have been approved to go forward, when they will be scheduled and carried out so that we can have all of the public input that's required on these various files brought in and considered by directors. So having those questions been answered, I hope to Ms. Kaufman's and Mr. Evans' satisfaction. I look to the next item, which would be a motion. We have no closed session. Just quickly scrolling through. We have no closed session. Somebody like to move adjournment? Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Thank you very much for everyone's patience, and we'll see you next time. We meet next week, and I understand we have a fairly full agenda. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.